this part of the course will concentrate on what happens after the grapes have been picked and put into containers, where they are crushed to form the must. And we'll start to understand the winemaking process. Then we'll revise how color and type of grape affect the wine we produce. We also learn how to use the passive voice to express processes in English, and I'll also explain later on why this is important. Farming for flavors is an expression that has to do with what we do when we grow grapes, especially for special purposes, with special qualities. First, let's read together this quotation by Baldi. The composition of grapes is influenced by factors that modify the temperature and light-sensitive physiological processes, including those that produce color, sugar, acids, and aroma flavor chemicals. In this chapter, Marian Baldi explains that the most important factor that affects wine flavors depends on the particular grape variety that's being cultivated. Note now how she uses the passive voice here. Let's see where we can identify a passive voice construction. Precisely in the very first sentences, she uses a passive construction. It is influenced. Why this is so? Because she wants us readers to focus on what she says and not on who she is, what she wears, or who she is with. The passive voice is a language resource we use to focus precisely on this, the content of the message, not in who says what. What happens in the grapes before we harvest them? Well, let's see what happens inside the grape and on the grape's skin. Certain things happen in a similar way in both green and red grapes. That is, the chemical and biological processes are basically the same in all grapes. If we focus on size and color, both red and green grapes get bigger and get softer when they ripen. But the green grape's color fades as compared with the color of red grapes. Later on, we'll take a closer look at what happens differently in green and red grapes. The photosynthesis results in the storage of sugar in the grapes, or the accumulation of sugar in the grapes. Remember from your school days that this process, photosynthesis, with such a difficult name, is in fact what happens inside the green leaves and other parts of the plant, or for that matter, or on all the green parts of trees or all kinds of plants. And it happens thanks to the sunlight it receives. One of the results of this photosynthesis process is that the content of sugar and water inside the grape also increases as the grape grows, and we've seen that before. What is different then when we produce red or white wines? Well, it's the time factor. Because we let red wine grapes to ripen longer, the reason for this is that red wine grapes are harvested when they have stored more sugar and when they have reached a certain level of acidity that is lower than that in white wine grapes. So, in the next slide, we are learning something about the crushing stage. This stage, or the first formal step in the winemaking process, is what properly initiates the winemaking process. It takes place in the fields or at the winery. The crushing process involves only the breaking of the skins of the grape, and the result of this crushing process is a mixture of skins, pipes, stems, and pulp. This mixture is called must. The Spanish word for must is mosto, so it's not very different. Let's now have a look at the crushing machine. In the old days, the crushing was made by people stepping and stomping on the grapes in huge wooden containers in the vineyard or outside the cellar. Usually there was a feast that celebrated the harvest too. But today the crushing is made in machines like that one and produces a mixture of juice, pips, stems and skin. This mixture starts to ferment very, very fast. Now what happened in the old days. There are two references here in this slide. The first reference is a commercial YouTube video that illustrates the harvest magic in Rioja vineyard, and the second one, the photograph of the lady stomping on a tunnel, is also a Google photo by Pinterest, and it illustrates how grapes were crushed before crushing machines started to be used everywhere. Now, what do we need to know about the fermentation stage in red wines? Why do we need to say something about fermentation now again? Because the fermentation process accelerates the crushing. And secondly, because the fermentation is after the crushing stage, when the separation of solids and liquids have been taken place. It's what exactly makes a difference between white and red wine making. So these two things in the slide are the two basic differences between white and red wine making, that is, keeping or not the solids and undertaking or not MLF. MLF is malolactic fermentation for short, but we'll learn about that later on again. Next, let's learn something about the process of racking. In this procedure, we first wait for the particles to form leaves, that's small particles or parts that looks like small white algae, and those leaves sink to the bottom of the container. This happens thanks of the force of the gravity, and this stage is called settling. Finally, the wine is moved into a clean container, but the fermentation processes continues, it goes on. So let's wait for a little while and try to concentrate on how we describe the sequence of actions in English. Let's first identify the words that capture the idea that something happens before or after something else. For example, the word once. It means the idea that a point of time, there's a point of time that separates something that has already finished and marks this transition. Also, another important grammatical feature that we use to mark the time transition is the type of tense used. In this case, the tense used is the present perfect tense, and the two words has taken what mark this time situation. And the action described is very close to the present. So keep in mind these three things about time marking. credits and references include, in this case, apart from the Baldi reference, the Language of Wines course book and Tom Canavan's web page. Just note that there's a grammar. I've included a grammar, or an English grammar, that can be found both in paper and in digital format, and also a documentation that can be found in the back page of the Language of Wine, the Language of Wines book, and this documentation, it's called Documentación Técnica del Departamento de Producción Vegetal y Fitotecnia, and it's been made by this research group at the Escuela Técnica Superior de Ingenieros Agrónomos de la Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. There's an enclosed video in the flap of the book, and you can find that there, and also in the course platform. And that's all for now. Thanks for watching.